Stories of mysterious abductions have been with us for decades, to the point that they've become a huge part of Western culture. Unfortunately, this has erased much of the nuance surrounding these events, including strange occurrences felt before, during, and even after the abduction itself. Perhaps it's finally time for people to listen to what really happened to those who found themselves taken in the night. Since the 1961 case of Barney and Betty Hill, so-called alien abduction stories have largely followed a familiar pattern. There are flashes of light, lost time, and haunting dreamlike memories of grim medical procedures and experiments. While skeptics argue that these similarities point to fabricated experiences, believers contend that such consistent details across so many accounts suggest something real. Yet over time, the constant retelling of these stories has blurred many of the original details. Like a copy of a copy, only the broad strokes remain intact. To fully understand these experiences, it's essential to return to the source, the men and women who claim to have lived through them. For instance, many people who report encounters with extraterrestrials describe them not as isolated incidents, but as recurring events. Some recall an unsettling sense of dread or paranoia in the days leading up to an encounter, marked by jitteriness and repetitive behaviours, like repeatedly locking doors and windows. One abductee compared this behaviour to how animals act when sensing a nearby predator. Stranger still are the frequent reports of bizarre auditory experiences, ringing, beeping, or clicking sounds that seem to come from nowhere. When these individuals ask others nearby if they can hear it, they often discover that the sound exists only in their minds. Other senses also seem to go haywire, with many reporting a strong smell of sulfur or feeling an unsettling vibration throughout their body. Some even describe poltergeist-like phenomena such as objects moving by themselves or electrical devices malfunctioning. The presence of these various phenomena surrounding abductions challenges the tired, drunken fisherman stereotypes often applied to these individuals. In truth, those who've experienced such encounters often describe a lasting sense of vulnerability, as if their safety can never be guaranteed again. The following tales were sent directly to Bedtime Stories, representing first-hand accounts from those who say they have lived through these terrifying experiences. A man going by the pseudonym Joe Keeble wrote to us about an experience he had in 1989, when he was a student at Bristol University in England. He recalls waking up one night at around 2 a.m. He was lying on his stomach, but after opening his eyes, he suddenly realized that he couldn't move. At the same time, he became aware of a pressure pushing down upon him, as if something was physically holding him down. He happened to have a large TV sitting on a chest of drawers across from his bed, a hefty old CRT his parents had given him when he went off to university. Its massive screen reflected the faint glow of the street lamps outside, almost like a mirror. It was then that Joe's tired eyes fixed on a dark, unfamiliar shape sitting on his back. The figure was small, roughly the size of a child, but clearly not human. Its head was unnaturally large, its body far too slight. Suddenly, there was a flash of movement, and Joe saw the glint of huge almond-shaped eyes reflecting back at him. The being, whatever it was, had turned its head and was now staring directly at him through the mirror image. Then came a strange grating noise, Horrified but paralyzed, Joe watched as the TV slowly began to rotate on the dresser. After several moments, it had turned enough so that he could no longer see the creature in the reflection. Then, without warning, he felt a sharp pain in his back. Moments later, he lost consciousness. When Joe awoke later that morning, he felt groggy, almost as though he'd been drugged. Expecting the drowsiness to lift after a few minutes, he waited, but the brain fog stubbornly persisted. Hoping a shower might clear his thoughts, he headed to the bathroom. There, as he undressed, he noticed a small, red, triangular mark on his back. When he pressed it with his finger, a sharp pain radiated outward. It was fresh and still tender. This discovery unsettled him. He'd awoken with a hazy memory of the strange creature from the night before, but had initially dismissed it as nothing more than a bizarre dream. After his shower, he returned to his room, only to find that his television was in a different position. In his email, Joe insisted he had never suffered from sleep paralysis, either before or after this incident. He also emphasized that the physical evidence, the mark on his back and the moved television, suggested that what he experienced wasn't just in his mind. As disturbing as Joe's story is, it pales in comparison to the experience of Kevin Jones and his then-girlfriend, Claire. In the early 2000s, the couple suffered a rash of inexplicable events that culminated in a truly terrifying encounter. A native of Wisconsin in the United States, Kevin reports that he began noticing strange goings-on a full week before the actual event. It all started one day whilst he was working in his home office. As he was looking at his computer monitor, he noticed a small black figure standing off to the left in his peripheral vision. Upon turning his head, the being disappeared. But whilst a single such instance could easily be dismissed as the mind playing tricks, Kevin reports that this happened again and again at all times of the day. He would be moving around the house doing different activities and suddenly catch a glimpse of the same small figure out the corner of his eye. But the moment he tried to focus on it, the shape would simply vanish. Kevin assumed this was all due to fatigue and made a silent promise to himself to get more sleep. However, one night, he decided to mention the phenomenon to Claire and was shocked to hear that she too had been experiencing the same thing. Try as they might, neither of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched. Over the course of the next week, things only got worse. Pictures would fall from walls. Items would fall off shelves. In all cases, nobody would be anywhere near them. Twice, the couple came home to find the cushions on their sofa rearranged into strange pentagon formations on the living room floor. Before long, the pair's frequent jokes about the house being haunted took on a less jovial, more sinister turn. They shared an experience that neither one of them could simply ignore. One night, they were both sitting in the living room. Claire was watching TV and Kevin was reading a book. Suddenly, Kevin heard a metallic beeping, as if someone was tapping Morse code. As strange as the sound was, its origins were more bizarre. Rather than being detected by his ears, he swears to this day that the noise came from inside his head, as if emanating from the very center of his brain. Moments after the noise finally died down, Claire looked at him and asked, "Did you just hear that?" The look on her face was one of confusion, but neither of them could pinpoint which direction the sound had come from. Strangest of all, the couple's two dogs didn't seem to react to it at all. Still, as far as they could tell, nothing else was amiss, so the couple simply went to bed as usual. However, when they awoke the following day, they both felt as if something was off. Claire complained of a sore patch on her stomach just below her navel, whilst Kevin was plagued by a sense of unease and detachment that he couldn't quite explain. In the weeks that followed, they both experienced strange and vivid dreams of what they could only describe as weird-looking people. Eventually, the images of the figures became so intrusive that Kevin found himself developing a debilitating insomnia. As his waking life began to suffer more and more, he decided to visit a hypnotherapist to help him improve his sleep. But when he told them what he'd been dreaming about, the therapist could not hide their concern. In fact, they suggested that Kevin undergo hypnotic regression. Reluctantly, Kevin agreed, and together, the two uncovered the following memory. On the night the couple had heard the strange metallic beeping noise, Kevin found himself awoken by a dull thud. Upon opening his eyes, he found that he was lying on his back, but was entirely paralyzed. He could see a black silhouette standing at the end of the bed, and from the corner of his eyes, he could see that Claire was not lying next to him. Instead, the covers were swept back, as if she'd gotten up in the middle of the night. Then Kevin caught a rustle of movement. Another small black silhouette was moving off to the side. Try as he might to turn his head and confront the figure, it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, he felt himself being lifted up. As this happened, he rotated onto his side so that he was facing directly towards the other black shape. But it was no longer at the side of the bed. Instead, it was walking slowly out the bedroom door. And that's when he saw Claire. She was floating just above the floor, moving along with the figure as if being dragged by an invisible rope. Like Kevin, she seemed to be awake, but immobilized. All she could do was stare upwards, a look of sheer terror on her face. Completely helpless, Kevin's body rolled over and over until he lightly impacted the bedroom floor. He was now facing towards the ceiling, floating just above the carpet. That's when the figure that had been standing at the end of the bed began moving towards him. As it did so, Kevin could feel his body moving in the direction of the doorway, in the same way his girlfriend had. Out in the hallway there was a third figure. However, where the first two were entirely black, this one exhibited some features. Unfortunately, Kevin was still unable to move anything but his eyes, which darted around in their sockets, probing for some clue as to what might be happening to him. Though he did not get a clear look at the third being, he could just barely make out a short frame beneath a large, grey-coloured head. The last thing he remembered was seeing the blurred image of a strange face right in front of his own, staring into his eyes. Then, he blacked out. Neither Kevin, Claire, nor the hypnotherapist had any idea what to do with this information. Whilst prevalent, hypnotic regression is not an exact science, and though Claire and Kevin did not end up staying together, he remains adamant that their experience was no dream. Manny Kunkel was born in Germany in 1988. In his email to us, he recalled that when he was about 17 years old, one of his friends, a girl named Amelie, would regale him with tales about aliens. In fact, she claimed that she had been in contact with extraterrestrials all her life. For his part, Manny was immensely skeptical. In his mind, Amelie was just a fantasist, but he did enjoy humouring her whenever she spoke about the subject. One day he finally asked her to describe what these supposed aliens looked like. She claimed that they were very tall, somewhat slim, and had white skin. In many cases, she said they could pass for humans, especially the females. Jokingly, Manny told her to tell them that he would like to meet them, and that they should come and visit him. Of course, he thought nothing of this remark. As the days passed, he forgot about the interaction entirely. Then, one hot night in the summer of 2005, Manny was awoken by a strange buzzing noise. It was dark, but he could immediately sense that there was someone in the room with him. He went to wipe his eyes, but felt a pressure on his hand, as if it was being held down. Suddenly, the weight released, and he looked down just in time to see a spindly white hand moving away from his own, before receding into the darkness of the room. His heart pounding, Manny spun around and turned on his lamp, only to discover that the room was empty. He was alone. He would have similar experiences on 2 more occasions before he finally told Amelie that he in fact did not want to meet her alien friends and would she mind asking them to stop visiting. He never experienced the phenomenon again. So what are we to make of these stories? The first thing to note is that all of them take place when the individuals are asleep, which lends credence to the skeptical view that they are the result of hallucinations during sleep paralysis. Indeed, much of what is described by those taken in the night fits the common symptoms of this condition, being unable to move, a heavy weight pressing down on the body, and the feeling of an ominous presence. Scientists attribute sleep paralysis experiences to the brain being trapped between sleep and wakefulness, which allows it to create vivid, dreamlike hallucinations whilst the body remains stationary. This would seem to explain Manny's situation, except for the fact he says the paralysis was only momentary and only affected his hand. In the cases of Kevin and Joe, who were totally incapacitated during their encounters, there was physical evidence after the incident. Even for skeptics, it's difficult to explain the appearance of injuries or the movement of objects in the room as the result of sleep paralysis. And what of the hundreds of abduction experiences that occur when the subject is not asleep, such as the many reported incidents that take place late at night whilst driving on lonely stretches of road? This brings up yet another question. What if alien abductions are not physical events at all? Perhaps these beings are not from another planet, but from a different plane of existence, and they are not interacting with our bodies, but with our minds. Is it possible that the abductees believe they are being physically removed from their rooms, whilst the actual interaction is playing out in their consciousness? This theory could explain why proving these encounters is so elusive. If the beings are able to enter our thoughts, they would leave little physical evidence behind. This theory would also explain the internal noises and visions. In Kevin's story, the couple's dogs hadn't reacted to the sounds that he and Claire heard. This is likely because they weren't occurring in the real physical world. Similarly, what if the marks on Joe's back and Claire's stomach were part of their vision, created out of their absolute belief that something physical occurred? Manifestations of this nature have been seen in other alleged supernatural phenomena, such as stigmata. On that basis, it's worth mentioning an experiment carried out by the team at Planet Weird, where they performed an alien abduction in reverse. Rather than initiating a regression, the hypnotist instead placed a suggestion into the subject's mind. This patient was unique in that they were a skeptic, not a believer. But whilst he was in a suggestive state, the hypnotist described the subject lying in bed and noticing a light at his window, followed by a small figure appearing in his room. And that was it. No more details were given. Nevertheless, upon coming out of the trance, the subject reported a whole subsequent experience of being taken aboard a ship and examined. Even after being informed of the memory implant, he remained utterly convinced that the entire episode was absolutely real. It's almost as if the hypnotist had accidentally unlocked some sort of doorway to an interaction with these beings. This raises even more profound questions about the nature of these entities. Some theorize that the Greys aren't extraterrestrial at all, but spiritual beings, possibly even demons. For instance, there are reports of abductees invoking the name of Christ, which instantly ends their experience, leaving them alone and unharmed. The smell of sulfur, a classic sign of demonic presence, is also commonly reported during such encounters. Finally, it's worth considering the medieval depictions of demonic imps, which bear an uncanny resemblance to many modern descriptions of the grey aliens. Perhaps the reason so-called alien encounters are so difficult to prove is that they aren't happening in the physical world at all. The visions, sounds and smells leading up to the actual abduction could be evidence of a thinning barrier between space and time, or even Earth and hell. Once porous enough, these creatures are finally able to enter our minds, tormenting us as we sleep. Are we looking to outer space when we should be looking within? It's hard to tell, but one thing is certain. If these beings are intent on infiltrating our world, there seems to be little we can do to stop them. Do you see that weird shape on the fence there? Looks like something looking in through the window and snarling, like those lines on the teeth. Those white lines like are the teeth. Then you've got those two dots which are the eyes. And then you've got the lines above, which kind of make out the shape of the head. It's like a polar bear or a dog. Oh, fucking hell!